there is a reason you hired this exec. Any savvy exec is going to know exactly what you're looking for. Redundant process, wasted time. We're all an inch deep and a mile wide. Wasted time.
Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Jordan Burton, co-founder of Talgo, a training company for private equity firms on talent interviewing and assessment. One of my favorite topics, obviously, to dive into is talent. We're going to go through interviewing processes. We're going to go through talent assessments, some of the questioning that we should be using. And I'll just remind everybody, when was the last time anybody in this industry got training on interviewing and assessment of talent? We all just expect ourselves to be good. So let's dive in to the podcast today with Jordan Burton on my favorite topic of talent and interviewing. Jordan, if you could share as a brief insight into you, please.
Sure, happy to. It's interesting. I have this strange career of being a professional interviewer. If I rewind the clock 20 years ago, I was on track to be either a private equity investor or operating exec, something like that myself. So it's possible to shift gears radically in your career, and something that was at once a detour can become your passion. So kind of come at this from a business angle as opposed to having some secret psychological background or HR or whatnot background.
Okay, perfect. And with regards to your experience and your background, just give us a bit of an insight into that, please.
Sure. So I began my career kind of seeking option value. So I was at Bain & Company doing consulting, kind of did that pre and post business school. I had some time during the dot-com boom doing entrepreneurial stuff. So I got a little taste of what it's like to be in an operating company, a high growth organization, and essentially made this big career pivot about 17 years ago, and joined a firm that had found a better way to accurately assess executive talent, largely on behalf of private equity investors. The firm's called GH Smart, and they've since grown into a pretty dominant player in the space. I had a wonderful run with them for about 6-7 years, and then struck off on my own about 10 years ago. Really found my passion for training others to do great interviewing, and had put together a lot of curriculum around what it takes to get human capital decisions right, and that's what's become Talgo.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that insight. So what's one mistake that you see private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
Of course, there are a lot. I'd say the most common one that we see, if you actually ask senior investors in particular, those who've been at it for a long time, you never hear someone say, I move too quickly when there's a human capital issue. When we have the wrong leader in the wrong role, I move too fast. I think I've heard that near 0 times. So the biggest mistake would be knowing that there's an issue, knowing that there's a mismatch between value creation plan and executive in question, being an incumbent or a new hire, and failing to take action, or waiting 6 months, waiting 9 months, waiting a year or more, hoping it's going to get better.
How does somebody know that it's time to act?
It's different for different situations. One of the most common signals that there is an issue is when there's lots of good intentions and good talk, but we're just not seeing it in board meetings. We're not seeing traction, the leading indicators that we are going to get on track, that we're going to be catching up to our model, to where where this organization needs to be from a top line, bottom line, whatever metrics. When we start to see those leading indicators, and instead we put our faith in the rhetoric, in the messages that, hey, we're doing this or that or the other, as opposed to just staying really vigilant about objectively what's going on. I think the other one is when we start feeling like it's a good thing or a kind thing to be accommodating and super flexible and letting things drag on. It's actually a service to all parties involved to reallocate or help transition out individuals at any level that aren't getting the job done. Let them find roles where they can be highly effective, rather than thinking that it's somehow a service to them to continue something that clearly isn't working for either side.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of you talking about it. It's probably already too late, as you said. I had to come to the conclusion of. So What's your take on? So we'll just dive. Obviously, particularly favorite topic for me, and I've got my pen ready to make some notes. So I'm sure there's plenty I'm going to glean from this as well as the listeners. But what's your thoughts on the pain of things? Because when we attribute hiring, and I run the firm here, and I obviously go for our clients or introduce people both for our clients and obviously hire for the business here. There's quite a bit of emotion that goes into a hiring process. I attribute a lot to like dating. So
Sure.
it's easy for us, me and you, to sit here and go, yeah, you should. If you know you've just hired your chief exec, and if you know that they're not doing what you need to do within the first 2 months, and you just can them off. Now, easy said than done. What's your take on that kind of emotional attachment and that kind of people are we're dealing with people at the end of the day. It's not like a machine that doesn't work. We send it back. What's your take on that?
It's a great question, and I would agree that snapping your fingers at the 1 to 2 month point is probably a bit premature. I think I would actually rewind the clock a bit and say, there is a reason you hired this exec. There's a set of results, OKRs, KPIs they need to hit, that you can know even prior to hiring the exec. That should be a central part of your process. That the initiation of your search should be getting crystal clear on what do we actually need to get done, and frankly, what are the signs and signals that we're on track. And what I would say is communicate that with the exec. If you want to make this like entire process, like set them up for success, give them the best chance possible, and also set the stage for a relatively objective and emotion-free transition out. Should we have to do that? Everybody wins if we have a conversation early on where we really do walk through and say, here's where we need to get. I think if you're talking about a chief exec example, I wouldn't get to the level of saying, here's where we need to get, and here's the exact formula for how to get there. At the end of the day, you're hiring a senior executive and you would like to empower them to find the means to get there. But at least letting them know this is where we are in terms of financial performance. And if there's some really critical subcut, the growth business is doing this, the legacy services business is doing this, and here's where we need it to get in sort of the timeframes we're looking at. What a gift to give to this new exec to set those kinds of expectations clearly. But I think it's honestly, it should be something that's a little bit deeper and say, here's what that looks like on the commercial side, the go-to-market side of the business. Here's what that may look like in terms of product or distribution, operations, services, whatever other elements of the business. Give them that lay of the land and inspire them to go after that in a manner that fits their skills and experiences. So it's clarity up front on what needs to get done. You'll often have an exec at the 1 or 2 month point who self-reports, we're off track. I know what's coming in the next board meeting, and I want to let you know early because we had so much transparency, and there's an opportunity to collaborate to right the ship as opposed to having it be a big mystery.
So let's start with what a good exec looks like, and then we can go into interview process, and no doubt we'll have some things from there. So if we think about a good executive, now every role is different, and so let's put the caveat there, and there's no one sweet science to everything. But
for sure,
if I ask you a very open question, what does a top private equity backed executive look like?
Well, you nailed it right at the beginning, saying that every role is different, of course. And in certain situations, certain skills and competencies and personality traits are going to be incredibly important, and they could actually be liabilities in other ones. However, looking across hundreds of these over 17 plus years, I'd point to 3 traits that I would say when I have the unfortunate situation on the back end of a hire that was a hire that either the CEO shouldn't have made with a CFO, COO, or that the private equity investor shouldn't have made with the CEO. There are 3 themes I see that suggest broader-based competencies that matter in private equity. And I would say one of them is sense of urgency, that understanding that in private equity investing, time really is money, mathematically speaking. We can deliver a great outcome in terms of an exit or a multiple. And if you look at your model and you look at that happening in 3 years versus 5 years versus 7 years, the LP returns are very, very different. So one is being an executive who respects the importance of time and realizes that we need to getting something done 80% well in a month is often better than seeking perfection in 6 months. So that would be one. Another one I would say, and this does depend on the investor, it depends on the industry, the sector, the subsector. It depends on the investment thesis, how we're really going to create value. Again, generally speaking, I have found it's rare that we see investors going, you know what, they rolled up their sleeves too much. They got into it. They did too much digging in to figure out what was really going on and verify things. 90% of the time, it's the opposite conversation. They're too removed from things. They're over delegating. Happy to speak about some root causes that I see in search processes that can lead to that kind of an outcome. But I would say a willingness to get your hands dirty and really go in and investigate, not 15 pages deep in the model and every single field office across the company's footprint, but selective diving in to verify that things are on track, both as a diagnostic and also as almost creating a cultural norm for all leaders in the company, that diligence and being on top of it is the way that we lead here. That would be number two.
Yeah.
I would say by the very nature of most private equity investors, these are individuals who are quite highly quantitative and analytical by nature. They think in terms of numbers. And I often see a mismatch between execs who are great operators who aren't naturally quantitatively oriented and investors who don't have the deep operating experience, and they end up speaking different languages. So I think a powerful traits, particularly for CEOs and CFOs, anyone who's going to be in the boardroom or having a lot of interface with the investor, is a little bit of a quant first. Quantify things, get things into metrics, make things visual and tangible and numeric whenever possible. Establishes a shared language with investors that leads to greater understanding and an ability to collaborate more seamlessly. So it'd be sense of urgency, rolling up sleeves, getting in there selectively when it matters, and a quantitative bent.
So if we start with number three first, how because one thing recognized with a lot of these conversations around talent is that they are, usual last point, unquantifiable to a certain extent. You can't look at someone's resume and go, I wonder how you roll up your sleeves and how you crack on. So it has to come from questioning. We're not seeing resume rolled up his sleeves or her sleeves, resume urgency level 5 versus level 3. Yes. So let's start with maybe something you answer across all three, but how do we quantify their quantity thinking?
How do we really dig into the quantitative thinking? Our work at Talgo is going really deep on the art of great questions and great dialogues. So we have like a whole curriculum on how you can explore these at a high level. When we ask executive candidates about experiences in their past, we will routinely ask for the quantitative metrics, the before, after, the rates of improvement, the situation that they came into quantitatively, what metrics they either were held to or they themselves established at the outset. So we're looking for someone. I don't need someone who recalls the details of every metric from 20 years ago, right? But I do want to see somebody who, when they come into roles, either by virtue of ownership of the organization they're in, they inherit metrics and targets, or in the absence of those, they create metrics to enable themselves as a leader to lead through a quantitative dashboard as opposed to leading by walking around. So there are specific questions we can ask around those metrics, the to froms and the levers for improvement. I love questions where an exec tells you about a starting point and an ending point, and they put a number on it. And we say, if you kind of waterfalled that out, if you said, tell me what the big drivers were and roughly how much each one of those levers contributed to the improvement, when someone can go there with me and really talk about each one of those items and sort of covariance between them, and we're kind of getting into the more really nerding out on the numbers, but I love to see someone have some facility to say over 50% of that margin improvement was purely from pricing. And here was specifically how we did it. And here's the analysis we did to know that we had room for price increases in this part of the business. It's that kind of a dialogue that we're looking for to establish that quantitative bet.
So is that the same for the other two with regards to basically competency-based questioning of tell me when you did, tell me when you didn't, tell me what happened, tell me what occurred?
Yeah, this gets a little bit into our approach and our curriculum. It's interesting to me that if you were to go online and look for schools of thought on great interviewing, and you really trimmed and refined that to try to find the most trustworthy sources, it's funny that you'll end up in a territory we call "tell me about a time when" territory. Another way of saying it, a lot of great thinkers on interviewing believe that tell me about a time when, or give me an example of X, where X is some competency or trait, is the best way to interview. I will say this, I think that it is far superior to a lot of very bad approaches, such as how would you establish metrics in this business? Hypothetical, somebody who's not quantitative could weave an incredible narrative about how they would do that, and it bears no resemblance to how they will actually behave in the role. Steer clear from those. So tell me about a time when is at least grounded in the past. But there's a problem with that approach. That approach involves you as the interviewer broadcasting what you're looking for. So if I said, tell me about a time when you really had to get quantitative, when you had to really establish kind of a dashboard or a set of metrics or KPIs that you held the team to, any savvy exec is going to know exactly what you're looking for. And even the honest ones are going to massage and manipulate their stories to tell you what they know you want to hear. Not because they're trying to lie to you necessarily, although many will, but because it's awkward to say, that's not really the way I lead. Our approach, we call it side door questions. Side door questions are asking the candidate, asking the executive to take you to stories that are likely to contain relevant content, but without telling them what you're looking for. Tell me about the state of affairs when you came into organization X as president and chief operating officer. What was happening in the business? How was it performing? How did you know that margins were on the wrong path? How did you know that competitors were at risk of curtailing growth? These kinds of questions are either going to lead us to quantification or they're not. And for those execs that are highly quantitative, they will naturally say, I knew it because we actually looked at, we did an analysis of pricing by region, by business line, and what we found was this pattern, and then numbers come out. So we call it side door questions. It's asking an executive to take you to stories using like these things around situations you inherited, performance of business before and after that naturally lend themselves to quantification, and discover how the exec actually did it in real life.
Makes sense. I like it. Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of our long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. So side door questions. I've not heard that one before. Yeah. So that's a new one. I like that a lot. So let's stick on the actual assessment of an individual. So we've clarified that those are the two main areas. What else are you looking for that makes an executive a top performer, that are traits that you were like, there's nobody else that I know that's done this? There's always an outlier for everything, but in most occurrences.
The longer I've been in the business of assessing execs, and interestingly, certainly Talgo is our primary focus, training investors and training their portfolio companies. I'm still in the business of doing exec assessment. I never want to not be an active interviewer. Never be someone teaching something and not doing it. So I'm still doing that with a handful of clients. And the longer I have done that, the more I have seen the importance of drive and motivation and will, like a compelling why, a reason why individuals want to go through the challenges and difficulty that's naturally just inherent in leading these organizations under professional ownership to do amazing things in terms of value creation. So I think it's one thing I'm always on the lookout for is what's the why for this exec? What's the thing that is going to propel them and compel them to inspire teams and do amazing things? I get a little nervous when it's strictly something about scorekeeping versus some peer group that they imagine themselves stacked up against, or if it's a monetary thing, particularly if they've had some nice exits, right? That there's only so much fuel in your tank if it's all about just hitting a number in your life. So I'm on the lookout for what is it that drives this individual and is going to keep them inspired, not just on task, but inspired given what some of the challenges we know we're going to face. A very long-winded way of saying will to do the job.
Okay, so second question is going to be the same. How do you assess for
that? The way that most interviewers, and this is true for portfolio or operating companies generally speaking, as well as investors and senior level hires, I think the single most frequently asked interview question from our polling and our research with lots of clients is, why do you want to do this job? When you ask somebody, what motivates you to do this? What do you like about this job? Why do you want to join XYZ Camp? Why do you want to be CEO of this company? It is an invitation to a prepared speech. Mm-hmm. It's the most often asked question, and it's also the question that most candidates, executive and otherwise, prepare for. They're going to learn about the business, they're going to learn about the role, and they're going to parrot back what they think you want to hear. So what you're really evaluating when you ask that question is, how well did this person prepare, and how great are they in giving extemporaneous speeches that are convincing and persuasive? The real magic, the real art of getting into the why is taking a disciplined approach. I would say the most powerful mechanism or approach that I've seen in my years of interviewing is understanding the motivations for all of the important career and professional, like the important career transitions in their past. We go way back. So when we're doing exec assessments on behalf of private equity investors, we are talking about academics. We're talking about early roles. We're learning about these patterns, what gets them moving on to a new job, what drives their satisfaction and dissatisfaction within a role. They may say it's all about value creation. It's all about hitting that number. It's all about achieving that target. But you look at it, and every transition is about learning and growth. It's about doing something new and different that rounds them out in some way. There may be congruence between the role in question. You know what? Somebody who wants to learn and grow is going to be really happy here. So we're okay with that. But it's important to know what really is the factor that throughout their past has been the motivator: learning and growth, freedom, autonomy, flexibility. And on comp, is it the cash part? Is it upside? Is there a title or a signal or a market value thing that they're going for? Is it really about the people and connections and the leading teams? You find what their juice is, and then you ask yourself, how much of that juice is in the role that we have to offer?
Yeah, I love it. I find that a lot of interviewing is a bit like being a detective. You're just kind of matching what's being said, what's being done. And
that's right.
Do they all align? So let's jump. So we jumped nicely and transitioned into the, we kind of painted a picture of what a good executive looks like. Let's focus around what a good interview process looks like. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you see, what does a good interview process look like for a CXO?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we're talking private equity backed CXO, this is interesting. If I look at the Talgo curriculum, there's a lot of points where we are very like, there's a right way and a wrong way. This is the right way. Like, don't ask hypothetical questions. Wrong way. On process, I would not say there is one best practice on process. However, there are certain guiding principles that are really important. I would say the single most important guiding principle of a great CXO hiring process is what we call divide and conquer. It's individual interviewers specializing in certain aspects of the roles and not trying to cover everything. So we're going to talk about failure modes of private equity funds and assessing execs. It's total lack of preparedness, no coordination amongst the team. We all have the same 45 or 60-minute conversation with the exec where we ask, what would you do in your first 90 days here? How do you think about this market or this industry? Why are you fired up about this job? And then maybe a little bit about how'd you do in your last 4 quarters at such and such.
And then they always ask them,
if we're all doing that,
what is your reason for leaving? The candidate gets asked that about 7 times in an interview process. It just drives them mad.
And the other thing is they rehearse their answers as they get feedback from each interviewer. They rehearse their answers, and often, like, you put the most important people whose time is the most valuable towards the end of the process.
Yeah.
Now I've had 6 goes at this question around why I left this short job chapter. I've got a perfectly buttoned up answer based on all the feedback that your colleagues gave me. Redundant process, wasted time. We're all an inch deep and a mile wide. Wasted time. So divide and conquer would be one. Happy to go into others.
Go into others. Like. Absolutely.
Sure. I would say, generally speaking, putting an exec through 15 plus interviewers is also a bad experience. It slows us down. It's wasted time. We hit diminishing returns way before that. I would say pick the short slate of interviewers who know their roles, who are able to go deep in the areas that they are specialists in, and have them capture the notes, capture the information. You've had this great dialogue. There's lots of ways to do that. We type. Some people do handwritten notes. If your organization allows it, you want to do an AI note taker, any one of these approaches can enable these other stakeholders to essentially reproduce the interview. I can look at your notes and know what you talked about. I didn't have to be there or talk to them myself. So if I'm like some board advisor number 12, I don't necessarily need to insert myself in the process and create friction and add time. I can simply review the body of evidence that we've gathered from all of these great conversations with this person and trust that you did a good job. So shorten the slates generally, deepen and specialize the interviews, and keep the questions focused on things that actually happened as opposed to how well the candidate performs in front of you.
Not only am I the host of the Private Equity Podcast, but I'm also the founder and managing partner of Raw Selection. Raw Selection is a private equity specialist executive search firm with 2 divisions, one that focuses on portfolio, C-suite executive hires, and one that focuses on private equity direct hires of your back office and investment deal professionals to the industry. Alongside the podcast, we're passionate about giving back to the industry and giving people information that they can run and utilize. One thing we do regularly every year is we run salary reports on accurate and live data of people that we've interviewed and people that have shared their information with us. So if you're looking to compare your current compensation or your compensation for your next hire in your private equity firm or portfolio company, then please check out our YouTube channel and see the playlist of salary surveys. So it's interesting that I don't hear, oh, do this, do this, do this. As everyone's process is different, and some people are down the road, some people are need to relocate. So I can understand the concept around that. What's your take as let's start with the beginning of the process, actually. Before we dive into the actual interview, what's the take on the process there? Because if I look into, obviously you work for GH Smart, so no doubt you're either an advocate or you hate scorecards, I would guess. But and depending on your position on GH Smart, but I'm an advocate for scorecards. I think building out that and creating clarity across multiple people, if anything, just so everyone's got clarity on the process. I'm also a big believer in your process of don't have everybody going in and asking the same questions. Get whoever's a specialist in what, get them to go and ask that. If it's your cultural person, Absolutely. Get them to go assess culture. If it's your model person, get them to go in there and assess their modeling skills or whatever it would be from there. What's your take on what's missed from before we even step foot to speaking with a candidate? What's your understanding of that? Because I include that as part of the interview process.
Yeah.
What's best practice there?
If I take the hiring process as essentially 5 steps, 5 dimensions: defining role, sourcing candidates, assessing and referencing candidates, making decisions, like the whole kind of running the process, sharing information and coming to a decision, and then the selling and onboarding. Of course, we're selling throughout. We don't want to wait to sell at the end. But if those are the skill sets, there's certainly failure modes in steps 1 and 2 before we see the candidate. Role definition, you've already hit on. I am a believer in scorecards. The approach, we call them targets at Talgo, and we really focus on, we don't have these as big 3-page documents that go into every specific thing of the to, from, and the how. You're hiring the exec to help you with the how.
Okay.
Get those clear indicators of how we know that we're going to be on track. Get granular about 90 days, 180 days, 1 year, wherever possible. But don't get way too prescriptive on the how. Love that. So there's a big mistake made where we don't get clear on what we want. And then the other part on role definition is a boilerplate list of like 30 generic wishy-washy competencies like excellent communicator, proactive, team player, strong leader. I can't tell you how many times we really need a strong leader.
Self-motivated. I haven't seen a job spec without self-motivated being in there. And then when I ask, how do you assess it? Everyone says, well, I don't know, just gut fit.
If you're interviewing somebody and they're clearly not self-motivated or not a great communicator, you don't need this item on a list to tell you that we have a problem. We say, keep that list short and tight and focus on what matters for this deal thesis, this organization, this culture, what really matters. It's about total transparency, right? Or it's about, they need to thrive in an environment of heavy direct feedback. This company has a culture and we as investors have a culture of very direct feedback. We need people who thrive on giving and taking sometimes kind of harsh critique. If that's true for us, put it on there. If it's not, don't put it on there. But I would say there's also step 2, the sourcing step. Before we ever see a candidate, some searches I think are not set up for success because we've decided to prioritize impressive resumes. Big names and big titles that we think that we're using as a proxy for the kind of individual behind it. So saying we want someone who's had at least 3 prior private equity backed CF roles at or above the scale. And we're going to source candidates with that as a filter. That's a problem. I would argue. I've seen a lot of searches that have a problem where we say the criteria of success and the sourcing criteria is must have done this job multiple times before. You're essentially saying we're only going to look at candidates for whom this is a lateral move. We have created massive selection bias towards lower performers, the ones we really want to attract, the ones who are high performers, who are driven to achieve great things time and time again, are often the ones who are not doing the same job again. They're actually in a stretch role. They're making a step function leap from one place to the next. So we say, really make sure that from a search and a sourcing perspective, that we're not getting too enamored with resumes and titles and years of experience doing X, that instead we're diving into the hallmarks of high performance, people who have consistently delighted their most important stakeholders.
So if we then move to the end of the process or later stages, what's your take on the presentation phase, the testing phase, however they like to play? What's your perception on that?
By presentation and testing, you're saying presentation, having the exec package all of this stuff into something where they play back their vision in front of the board, in front of the hiring committee, whatever it may be. Is that what you mean by presentation?
Yeah, there's a lot of love for what would you do in the first 90 days? How would you build a business? How do you take it to an exit?
I would say there is some value in having an executive give you a picture of what their intellectual plan and path is for the business. I think if you went through a process without having the exec say, based on all that I've learned about this business, here's how I'm thinking about my first 90 or 100 days or whatever it may be. That said, just understand that that's relatively cheap talk. What I would say is that is prone to false positives. It's not prone to false negatives, but it is prone to false positives. Meaning, an exec can give you a great story about what they would do. I'm going to present you the plan, my vision for how we push this company forward. If you get a great answer, do not mistake that for a great candidate. What this question really is about is making sure we don't clearly have a bad candidate. If somebody gives you a plan that is not good, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't add up, that's not consistent with what we know needs to be done in the business, I think you have clearly ruled out this candidate. The failure mode there is thinking that we have a good candidate because the answer was good.
Yeah.
So for example, let's take another important skill in private equity, accountability, holding self and others accountable in a humane, personable way, but knowing that their expectations that we hit or we don't, and there's great things that happen if we hit, and there are consequences if we don't. Having somebody say, in my first 90 days, we're going to get real on accountability. We're going to cascade metrics across the organization. We're going to establish OKRs or some program like that, and we're going to have everyone on plans for either meeting those or not, and blah, blah, blah. Somebody who is conflict avoidant, who struggles to hold others accountable, can present you a perfectly valid, awesome sounding little pitch on what they would do. That's the false positive that we need to steer clear from. If I had to put a bow on the thing around presentation, don't overinvest in it. I would spend the majority of our time evaluating exec, learning about them and their path, learning about the facts, and steering clear of too much of the, call it cheap talk, prognostication about the future. On the testing thing, different clients of ours have different inclinations on this. I generally have not seen testing to be like a really valuable, this is a go, no go. So someone's done X or Y, whether it's an aptitude test, a psychometric test, we all know the big names. I've rarely seen those be like, this made the decision one way or the other. I think it could be a useful lens to help you know where to dig in with a candidate in terms of interviewing and where they've been and what they've done. So it's like a tool, and it provides a nice kind of alternate lens to view the human being. But I really feel like when people build skill in the art and science of great interviewing and great referencing, they free themselves to be less reliant upon these other things, over-reliance on resumes, overuse and over-application of testing, certainly overuse and over-application of these performances and presentations. The better you get with interviewing, the more confident you can be in making data-driven decisions without a lot of these other things.
I think, all of these steps contribute to making an educated decision, don't they? And we're not, I'm a big, I'm a bit conflicted with regards to testing. We use it internally, but I don't recommend any of our clients use it, because what I say is I can give you an indication of what we're looking for based on our culture, based on how we operate, based on what we do, and they benefit our test. And everyone in our business has been tested, and I can look at the metrics and go, this is, this can make or break a process for us. But unless a firm's gone through that and really understand what they're looking for and what makes them great, and who's their top performing executive and why, it's just a test that gives them an indication of something that they're not sure how that plays in the real world.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer of two things that contribute highly to high performance. One is conscientiousness, so how hard somebody works, in reference to what you said earlier. And the second is their intellect, based on an IQ and EQ basis of those. I put IQ and EQ together, but those two elements or three elements are commensurate with, if you have those, you are more likely to be successful. But again, there's people that I know that have really high IQs, much more intelligent than I am, much more better at engaging people than I am. I wouldn't say hardworking than I am, but they have one of the, or two of the three. But they're not in highly successful roles, possibly because the hard work ethic or the drive, as you mentioned earlier, isn't there. So that's a big thing from certainly from my consideration.
Sure. It's funny, as much as I resist sort of simple platitudes or rules of thumb, there's something to be said for hungry, humble, and smart.
Yeah.
There really is some value in that. And I would agree, intellect does matter. The thing I caution, I have worked with a handful of investors. Typically, people don't get into private equity because they have low IQs. We're typically talking about very high IQs. I do see a failure mode where we expect our CEO to be a quantitative whiz to the level that we are, and we assume that they're incapable if they're not. I've seen some highly successful serial private equity CEOs who have outstanding EQ and ample IQ, but they may not be outshining their investors in the boardroom in terms of running the sensitivity analysis in their head on,
Yeah.
cell H4 on the model.
Well, no, absolutely. No, I think that's a pretty good point. There's some smart people in our industry, and a lot of them would sit with the investor community, certainly from there. With so Jordan, with regards to your self-investment, what are your influences? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to that you recommend others to check out, please?
Oh, it's interesting. I'm kind of one of these like fans of the classics. There's been a handful of books in particular that I would say have been really influential for me in my own career, but certainly in my work with a lot of execs and coaching work that I've done. I love What Got You Here Won't Get You There. In terms of like, it's kind of like the growth mindset in terms of understanding our careers are evolutions. They should be. And it's important to realize that the very things that you've built in your career to date can become liabilities. It's important to be continuously analyzing and transforming and reimagining who we are and doing the difficult work of evolving ourselves. In terms of culture, I would just say I have a general affinity for of the book Radical Candor, around building a culture where we, in a humane way, are very honest about what's happening and what's not. I think companies that struggle with candor struggle with performance. There's a clear correlation in my experience there. I love classics like Good to Great. So some of these things are just kind of these timeless maybe even like Crossing the Chasm and some of these things around high growth organizations. So it's a little boring and a little trite, but I feel like there's these pearls of wisdom. We want to jump to the new hot bestseller or whatever. And I think that generally speaking, I'm just fond of what are the tried and true principles from the great thinkers that have stood the test of time.
I'm in agreement with that. Kim Scott's radical candor is one of our values in the business, actually. I believe it's
Oh, really?
a very important element in The Humble, Hungry, Smart comes from Patrick Lencioni.
Lencioni, yeah.
He's a absolutely fantastic author and one of my favorite on executive and leaderships, and makes everything simple and writes everything in a private equity lens, to be honest. So that's even better. So, John, if anybody wants to reach out to you post this, how best to get in touch, please?
We are at talgo.io. That's talent algorithm compressed into Talgo, TALGO.io. Find us there. You can learn about our programs. We certainly work with a lot of private equity firms to help them build their assessment skills in-house, whether that's for internal hiring, certainly for portfolio company exec hiring, as we've discussed. So we do a lot of work helping private equities really build sustainable competitive advantage in talent. But we also have programs for individuals. If your firm isn't up for it, but you want to learn a set of really powerful tools to help you get kind of X-ray vision into individuals, we have a program called Talgo On Demand. And you can go on and basically have a hybrid experience where there's content of myself and my colleague Matt presenting this curriculum in very attention-grabbing short clips, actual interviews where you can see us in action, combined with live experiences with us. So you can't learn to interview without the live experience. So when you sign up for that, you also have real training, an opportunity to, of course, ask questions about the curriculum, but also practice it. So please reach out to us, talgo.io. We'd be happy to meet you and hear about what you need.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the podcast, Jordan, sharing your insights.
Thanks for having
one of
me.
my favorite topics. I've done my best to keep my mouth shut, as I could talk about this all day, and I don't learn from talking. I learn from listening. As one of my former chief execs taught me once, and he was right. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on. It's a hotly contested topic. Talent, hiring, people, process around that is well documented with content, but not probably the quality that we'd all like. Otherwise, we would all have nailed it. But it is very much an art, not a science. But we can do better with regards to those percentages to get things right. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing everything you have.
Thank you. And next time, I'd love to learn from you as well. I know this is a topic for both of us. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you very much for everybody for listening. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to the podcast and you'll be notified of when it comes out every single week. But till the next time, keep smashing it. And thank you very much for listening.